welcome to Listen Up, the final episode of Season 3. It's a little bittersweet. I'm still Alex Coma. He's still Joey Trincali. We're rocking the NHL shirts because the NHL playoffs are close. But we'll get to that in a second. We're going to lead off with our top 5 topics. Starting off, something a little different for us. Jason Collins came out as the first actively, openly gay player in one of the 4 major pro sports. How do you think his announcement changes the culture of pro sports, if at all?
Well, first of all, I think it's pretty incredible. It's pretty courageous that Collins decided to come out and announce to the world that he's gay and then attempts to continue to play one of the 4 major sports. It's an incredible thing. It's really quite the burden he's going to have to take on for the LGBT community as really this iconic person for them now. And that's tough. I mean, there's going to be a lot of stuff that goes with that, and some of that's going to be good. He's going on Oprah soon. He's getting a lot of exposure, and he's a 12-year veteran in the NBA that wouldn't have this exposure otherwise. But there's going to be backlash, and there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be said. And when he gets back to the NBA, if he gets on a team, hopefully, there could be a lot of problems with that as well. And so I really do think there was Tim Brando had a tweet about how Collins wasn't a hero because of this. And listen, if there's someone out there who is a gay athlete, who is a 12-year-old, who now feels a little bit more comfortable and feels a little bit better about what he could possibly do with his life, then you know what? Jason Collins is a hero in my book, but that's just me. I don't know about the culture, though. I think that's interesting. I think that it's going to take a lot of time to change. I'd say the culture that could be different is that because he's the first, because he's taken on that burden, maybe we kind of see the opening of the floodgates here, and that other players that have been really hiding from themselves, hiding from their teammates, possibly decide, you know what, now is the time because I don't have to have that burden of being the first active athlete to do it in one of the 4 major sports in North America.
Yeah, and I think there was a report, it was from CBS, where it said that there were 4 NFL players that were thinking about coming out, and who knows how true that was because it was nothing but anonymous source after anonymous source. Yes. But I think it points to the larger thing that you were talking about, which is saying that now if someone doesn't have to deal with the stigma of being the guy or girl, then I think that it means that we're more likely to see more people come out with it and realize that there has been a huge outpouring of support for Jason Collins, particularly from people in the sports media and from fellow athletes. There have been a lot of people on Twitter supporting his decision to come out. It's mostly been positive, and while you're always going to have the people that say dumb stuff, it seemed very positive for Jason Collins and very encouraging. But the reason that I phrased the question the way that I did is I think that it's the infinitely more interesting one. The one to ask that, is this really a first step of some kind? Is it the first step of many? I just think that, there was an article on Deadspin today about a former article that ran way back in, I think it was 1996, about Tommy Lasorda's son, who was gay. And the idea behind that article back in the day was that would help start a conversation that we're only really now just having close to 20 years later. And the article wrote a postscript to that in light of the Jason Collins news saying, I honestly thought this would do it. I honestly thought that we wouldn't have to wait until 2013 to hear an athlete come out while still playing a sport. So I think it clearly shows that, Mike Wallace, he's going to say dumb stuff.
Yes.
Davon Morgan, formerly of the Virginia Tech Hokies, is going to say some really dumb stuff. And so I think that, it's just so ingrained in the culture to be so macho, and even beyond that, to have so much of a mentality that it's about the team, it's not about me, why should I talk about me, that it's going to be really hard before we see locker rooms become more accepting of this.
I think that the reason why the culture could change is, one, we've seen America, especially in sports, it moves slow a lot. But I think that over the last just 5 years, you could say, things have really, really picked up. And I think what this does with the Collins announcement, more than anything, is that now, because before, if there was no one else, no equals that you could point to, then someone could say something in the locker room, the spirit of the macho basketball or macho football or whatever, and maybe it goes under the radar a little bit. But now I think what happens is that if you say something like that, if you're a Mike Wallace, then immediately you are put under the microscope and honestly persecuted rightly for saying some pretty stupid things that aren't really tolerant towards certain people. And so because of that, because he comes out, I think that in general, maybe we can just look at the people that are saying the stupid stuff and we really can point them out for being dumb, because say, you know what, look at this guy who's a great locker room guy, a guy that everyone loves, and he's come out and say, your comment's pretty stupid, it's pretty dumb. And I think because he's come out, I think that conversation maybe gets gets going a little bit more. But I don't know. It's hard because, especially in football and even hockey, two really, really macho man sports, I think it's tough to just change that culture overnight, unfortunately.
Yeah, and here's what I think is interesting. That we move to a point where if you say something like what Mike Wallace did, saying he didn't understand Jason Collins being gay, then you're going to be just have an avalanche of negative feelings. But my question is, how does it go behind the scenes for the things that we don't see? How do these people, even these people who might not say anything, who might even be supporting Jason Collins, really feel? And how does that play out with coaches, with players in the locker room? That's what I think will be interesting to see moving forward, because I strongly suspect that while having someone to humanize it, which I think Jason Collins can surely do, it's still gonna have tension in the locker room, and I think it's gonna take decades before we see that move on. So hopefully at least Jason Collins was a good starting point.
I hope it's not decades, but I think that in decades we will look back and say, wow, this was
Big deal.
It was a big deal, but it was kind of silly that we had it to be a big deal in the first place. All right, let's move on now to the 2013 NFL Draft. It's finally in the books. Who are the winners, the losers, your biggest surprises?
Well, we got to start with the biggest surprise, because I think we all know what it is. It's E.J. Manuel, the first quarterback off the board to the Buffalo Bills. I nearly fell out of my chair when his name was called. Considering most people had him going in, what, third, fourth round at the very best. I'm pretty sure Mel Kiper had him as his number 6 quarterback, and for him to go with the 16th pick, that's insane to me. My favorite thing, I don't know if you saw this, Doug Marrone said in an interview today, new coach of the Buffalo Bills, formerly of Syracuse University, he picked Manuel largely in part to this bad weather workout he saw from E.J. Manuel down in Tallahassee. Keep in mind, he said this about a quarterback who's played his entire career in the state of Florida when his own former protege, Ryan Nassib, played in the same upper New York area that they will be going to. That is a burn on Ryan Nassib if I've ever heard one there. I love that.
I think it's just a burn on him, period. The fact that they decided to take a quarterback in the first round, trade up, and it's not this guy that, Marrone kind of created.
That he was his offensive coordinator and head coach. This was his guy as much as anyone could be. Thanks, but no thanks.
I'm going to go with E.J. Manuel. No, I agree. I think that was probably the biggest surprise, and I think it really makes the Bills losers. And I said here that it's really hard to judge winners and losers right now. You can't judge this until 4, even 5 years down the road. But when you look at the fact that what we've seen over the past few years, when you miss on that franchise quarterback, it sets your team back a really long way. And it's interesting because for me, I would feel that teams would have been less likely to pick quarterbacks higher up in the draft when they were having to dole out $60 million guaranteed contracts. Right. And now it seems that we've changed that. But over the last few years, we figured out that if we miss, even with the contract situation being a little bit better, it can still just kill your franchise. So no more do you say, oh, you know what? Let's take a flyer on Blaine Gabbert. Let's just try it because it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, it kills your team. So if the Bills are wrong here, even with the nice contract that they're going to have for E.J. Manuel, it's going to hurt them a lot. I'll say my biggest winner for the first round is your boys. How the heck did Jarvis Jones fall to the middle of the first round? Here's a guy that dominated in the SEC on one of the best teams in the country. What else do you want? I mean, do you agree with my winner statement?
I like it. I personally think that there were other bigger winners, but I'm happy to hear you talk about it.
I want to be nice.
I appreciate it. The fact that they didn't take a single offensive lineman when that was already a weak position, and then they lost a few guys in the offseason, that peeved me. But you know what? I like their second-round pick, Le'Veon Bell. I like some of the receivers that they were able to pick up. I thought that it was a very Steelers draft, very quintessential. They got exactly the guy that they wanted, a guy who had poor workouts but great college production. I can't argue with that one bit.
Last week we talked about how I did not want anyone to take a quarterback in the first round. That was my big thing. That being said, the Jets. Now, the Jets make a lot of wrong decisions, we've seen. But getting rid of Tebow and then getting Geno in the second round and D. Milner to kind of come in, obviously he's not going to be Revis right away, but to get him as well, I don't know, I thought that they had a nice little draft as well.
Yeah, I can't argue with that one bit. I love D. Milner. I thought that, if the Steelers were up there, I wanted him so bad. But I thought that they did a nice job of addressing their needs and not doing that quintessential Jets thing, which would have been to say, oh, we got the 7th pick, we need to use it, Geno Smith. I think that was,
that would have been bad.
what they want. I think in years past, that's what they would have done, so I applaud that restraint. You're operating like a real football team now. Good job. My other winners, I think, I really liked what Green Bay did. Eddie Lacy is for a lot of people, the top running back coming out of college. There were some concerns, particularly from the Steelers, as one of the many teams that passed on him, coming from his injury. A lot of people think it might be turf toe, and that scares them away a little bit. But that being said, you get him with the 55th pick in the draft.
Why not?
I'm feeling a little bit better about it when they have no one there at running back. And the other team that really interested me is the Eagles. I think that I'm going to like the Chip Kelly era already because...
Yeah, you love that.
I do. Lane Johnson, number 1, very solid pick. You can't argue with that. They had offensive line troubles. Hopefully he starts to help change that. Goes a little bit out of left field with Zach Ertz in the 2nd round to provide, that try and run, maybe that 2 tight end system there with Brent Selleck on the other side, who's certainly no slouch. It's not an indictment on him. I think it's more saying what Chip Kelly wants to do on offense, and then taking a flyer in the 4th round on Matt Barkley. Who knows whether it's Mike Vick, who knows whether it's Nick Foles. Having Barkley around could certainly be an interesting guy to build the new offense around.
Yeah, and I'll say one last thing about the Redskins. Now, I like to talk...
you know what? I actually can't criticize you guys when you consider that RG3 essentially is a member of this draft class still for you in the next few years.
Sure.
So I can't argue with it at all. He's as good as advertised.
Hey, it was a great year not to have a first-round pick. It was almost better because they didn't have to make a stupid decision. I think that I know that people weren't a fan of the Amerson thing, but, tell me if you disagree with this statement. Just the idea that in the NFL now, you're not going to be able to stop teams in the air. It just doesn't happen. But if you can get some guys that can be playmakers, that can get some interceptions, takeaways, we've seen the New England Patriots, worst team defensively in the league, but they got takeaways, so they were able to survive. I think that's not a bad pick, and they let the safeties come to them, not make any crazy trades or anything.
It certainly could have gone a lot worse for you, and it has before, and I'm sure it will
recently.
Again. Yeah, I'm sure it will again.
Thanks.
All right, moving on over into the NBA. The contenders in the playoffs just been ravaged by injuries, with Russell Westbrook of the Thunder the latest guy to go down. At this point, do you think anyone can beat the Heat or even slow them down?
No. The answer is no. Neither of those things. Here's the thing. This is what's so crazy about the Heat is that they are so good and so talented, and LeBron James is at just the peak of his apex, that we are going to look back on this and not say, wow, the Heat got lucky because a lot of those teams were not at full strength, a lot of quality teams like the Thunder. But we're not going to say that. We're going to say, God, that was a really good Heat team, and that's what's so incredible. But it would be fun and a lot more interesting if some of these teams weren't hurt. It's a real shame because I think we could have had an intriguing playoffs, but now it's like, maybe the Spurs can put up a fight in the finals if they get there, but then we're going to see just how old the Spurs are if they're playing in middle June against a team that's just so much better athletically than they are.
Yeah, I think the Spurs are really the last hope for a non-Heat. Yeah, I just think that's how it is because maybe Greg Popovich can work one last miracle, but at the end of the day, the Heat beat them twice and win their 2 meetings in the regular season. They're that good. Even with as efficient as they are on offense, the Heat are more efficient. So I think that it's a real shame because I think coming into the playoffs, we all understood that while the Spurs might have been the top seed, the Thunder were the team that had the best shot of getting to the finals and knocking off the Heat. But they needed Westbrook to do that. I know he can do some dumb things. He can take some dumb shots. He's even been a little more shoddy on defense than really I think we thought he was going to be coming out of school. But at the same time, he's what made that team so dynamic offensively. Even with Durant on there, he was really what made the offense as dangerous. I wouldn't even say as dangerous, approaching Miami's level of danger on offense.
Yeah,
so I think in the East, it's going to come down to Indiana and New York as the teams that might be able to give it a shot. I mean, both of them won 2 out of 3 meetings with the Heat in the regular season, but the Knicks, they showed you what happened when Carmelo Anthony has a bad shooting night, struggling against a Boston team that just a good shooting night is like 30% for them. So, and then you look at Indiana, they might not get out of the first round. They're tied at 2 with the Hawks right now, which makes no sense to me. I think maybe Indiana with their size could give them a good series. They had some bad blood after last year. Who knows? And certainly a better team this year than they were last year, but man, 6 games at most is the definition here.
I don't know. And the thing with the Knicks as well is that the Heat have the defensive capabilities to make him have bad shooting nights. That's my only thing was what you were going to say. Is just, can Popovich outcoach them and steal 2 games,
Sure.
and then the Spurs somehow find a way to win 2 other games.
Yep.
That's essentially the only way that I could see that. And the Spurs have to get there first because, you know, the Grizzlies look really good right now, and the Warriors are 1 win a game. So your boys, I guess. So I don't know. I don't think anyone. It's just not.
It's gonna suck. I'd rather watch the NHL.
Over under 3 games lost for the Heat this
Can I
playoff.
push? How
No,
boring
you
is
can't
that?
push.
All right, under.
Okay, I'll go under as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on now to the baseball season. It started. It's going on. We're a month in. The Red Sox might be the biggest early surprise so far. At 18-7, they sit atop the AL East. Do you think that this can continue?
I don't know. It certainly might. I mean, it's weird to look at that division right now. The Yankees and the Orioles are 2 and 2.5 games behind, respectively. 2 of the teams I think everyone thought would be trailing towards the bottom, but as it always happens in the AL East, we're talking about the same teams year after year. I don't think that anyone could have seen that pitching being as bad as it was last year, but I also think it's stunning to see how good it's been this year. Clay Buchholz, 5-0 with a 1.19 ERA. He's been incredible. Ryan Dempster, a guy who I thought would have a lot of trouble moving over from, you know, the NL Central and seeing my Pirates every 5 starts, as opposed to the AL East with its potent offenses. The guy's got a 3.3 ERA right now and 43 strikeouts to sort of help anchor that staff with Buchholz. If they keep getting the pitching, maybe they make that division interesting.
That's my thing, is I don't know if they're necessarily going to sit atop the league for the entire year, but that AL East is wide open. The Yankees have somehow transferred us back into 2006, but can that continue?
Right.
The Orioles, still an incredible story, top 5 offensively in terms of their, you know, top half of the lineup is
and
incredible.
no one understands why.
But they have no pitching. They literally,
none.
You cannot name a pitcher on their team right now. Like, you can't do it. They're putting in AAA guys every other start at this point. It can't last. I don't know how it could last. And so then, obviously, the Rays have been kind of up and down, and Toronto would have to be 30 games over 500 to get to 90 wins at this point because they started so slow. So, for me, I don't know. I think they can stay atop. It makes a difference if Clay Buchholz has kind of taken the step that maybe he's an elite pitcher now. I really like the Ryan Dempster signing, and he's turned out to be pretty good, kind of anchoring the middle of that rotation. The offense will not continue at the rate they are right now. They're top 5 in pretty much every
third
category.
in the league.
Exactly. 3rd in the league in average and runs, I believe, as well.
Runs.
But for me, the thing is that they don't have to stay in the top 5 to continue to be relevant. If they can stay in the top 10, which I think is very doable, then I think they can make some noise. I think they're an interesting team. And this is a Red Sox team. They're quintessential. It reminds you more of the Red Sox. It's not Adrian Gonzalez. It's not $1 million. More than $1 million, obviously, but, you know, a couple $1 trillion to Carl Crawford. So for me, I think that because of that, people are going to try to grapple onto that a little bit more, and so I think they can stay top.
Yeah, I mean, the Yankees definitely have to be in the conversation. Robinson Cano is pretty much single-handedly keeping that offense afloat right now. They're certainly not bad. They're 7th in runs scored, but it's Cano's numbers are just eye-popping, making a very convincing case for MVP, at least so far. Yeah, that's what it always helps. And really, but not a lot in the way of pitching in terms of, you know, just CeCe Sabathia and Andy Pettitte pretty much right now. Maybe as they start to get a little healthier, they get Jeter back, maybe they can start to overtake them, but it would not surprise me at all to see the Sox win this division. As hard as that is to believe. Well, I talked about it before. The NHL playoffs just started last night, mercifully. What first-round series intrigues you the most?
And I'm really glad that we're talking about it, and I agree completely with you. I am way more in the NHL right now just because it's crazy. It's so unpredictable. Right. It's like the NCAA tournament, but everyone's really good, you know? So I like it a lot. I'll talk about, first, the East. I'll say that the Toronto-Boston series intrigues me because Toronto hasn't been to the playoffs since before the lockout.
2004.
They haven't won a Stanley Cup since the 1960s, and those are 2 really proud franchises, so I think that's interesting. But Boston is a ton better. I mean, just a lot better than this team, but you never know in the playoffs. Every year we see crazy teams win. So the Toronto series is interesting just because Toronto's such a great hockey city, and they haven't had success for a while, so that'll be interesting. In the West, who do I like in the West? Oh, yeah, the Canucks. The Canucks and the Sharks.
Whoa.
Why is that interesting? Not saying that I like the Canucks, but I like that series because it's the 2 teams that's like, hey, who fails more in the playoffs than these 2 teams? And tonight, Roberto Luongo is starting in goal. He's back, baby. So that has got a ton of great media talking points. So I like that series in the West as well.
Well, I'm with you on the same mind in the East because I think that, you know, the Bruins kind of had a crappy end of the season.
They weren't great.
It wasn't great, and they're really depending on Tuukka Rask and Tyler Seguin to act like the stars that we think that they are. And I just mentioned him last week as one of the top 2 contenders in the East, but couldn't you see this weird, spunky Toronto team making things tough for them? Crazy home games in Toronto for the first time in nearly a decade? I think that's really interesting. They've also got the goaltending here. James Weimer, Ben Scrivens, both very good goaltenders that could, who knows, push them, even to take them out of the first round.
Or fall in their place.
Yeah, you never know.
What's fun about it.
Exactly. That you can't know in the NHL playoffs. I think that the West is considerably more wide open. You think about the Blackhawks and the Penguins in the top, but really when you look for teams in the middle, they're few and far between. I think that the series that's interesting in the West is St. Louis and LA. I think whoever comes out of there could be the team to make the run. We've talked about the Kings before. You never count out a guy like Jonathan Quick. But St. Louis, kind of sneaky. They are the 4 seed, so they got home ice. They won Game 1 in OT, a tough, gritty win.
That Quick
didn't
gave
look
away.
Very good.
Didn't look very good, even though he's one of the best goalies in the league.
Exactly. But when you look at their goalies, Jake Elliott, Jaroslav Halak, even Jake Allen, they're all guys with above 500 records. So you just never know. I think whoever comes out of that series, that could be the second best team in the West. Because who else do you like? I mean, you talk about your Canucks and the Sharks. No offense, I don't believe in either of them particularly.
They're fun, though. They're fun.
Yeah, and you got the old Red Wings, the hopeless Wild.
The Ducks. The Ducks, they've got a lot of firepower.
They do, but they've also had a really bad end of the season. So who do you really like? I think that if one of those teams could come out of a series hot, that could be your other Western Conference finalist. I would like to see.
The other series, the Caps Rangers. I think that's intriguing just because they've played now
history.
3 years straight, and each year the Capitals have had a different coach. I think it's interesting. Everything that the Caps can kind of throw out, they've got a pretty talented top 6. Well, the Rangers actually possess the puck a lot better than them. Well, the Capitals have a great power play, the best in the league. Well, the Rangers don't take any penalties. So I think that that's really interesting. I like the fact that everyone's kind of going against the Caps because that's always fun. It's so interesting. You talk about the way that teams end the year, but there's been statistics and studies out that have shown that the way teams end, specifically if you end well, it has not been an effect. Once you get to the playoffs, the last, I think they said 3 have essentially been 500 in the last 20 games going into the playoffs, and yet they somehow found a way to win once they get into the Stanley Cup playoffs. So it's wide open. That's why we like it.
That's right. All right. Well, I mean, we know this series isn't intriguing because,
Yeah,
okay, all right. That's going to be good stuff. While I'm gloating, I should mention it's a historic day. Alex Coma has won Pick'em. It's a great triumph for the first time ever. Let's just take a moment to appreciate how great that is before we light you up with some quick hits. Starting things off, the Jets say that all 5 quarterbacks on their roster will compete for the starting job. Do you believe them?
Remember before when I was praising the Jets? Well, honestly, I do believe them because the Jets are that stupid, and that's something they'd like to do.
Exactly. I said it makes no sense. That's why Rex Ryan is all in. He loves it.
Steven Strasburg is feeling arm tightness. How are you feeling about the ace?
Not super great, given how the Nats are playing right now. But I've heard that some people are saying it's all he's playing mind games because he hasn't been playing so well, and he's trying to deflect it. So you just enjoy that, Washington fans.
Interesting.
I'm
less worried about the health and more about the psyche.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Justin Blackmon of the Jaguars has been suspended 4 games this season for his 3rd substance abuse issue. What do you think about that?
All the talent in the world, he's got to make a decision what kind of life he wants to live. I mean, that's it.
Apparently, the Jags knew about this suspension way before we did, but he's behaved well for the new coaching staff and GM, which I guess is supposed to make me feel better about a guy who's only 2 years in the league and already has 3 strikes. So, you go, Justin.
Bryce Harper says he's a fan of the Wave amidst huge amount of anti-Wave sentiment at the Nationals Park. Do you agree with him?
It's a clown position, bro.
Okay, listen. This is the worst news I've ever heard. I just wrote a paper on how we should kill the Wave. I'm devastated. My childhood idol, who happens to be younger than me, has just ruined me. He's letting me down.
All right, finally, Tim Tebow has been cut by the Jets, but good news. The Omaha Beef Indoor League football team say they'll take him, and get this, pay him $75 a game. Does that sound like a good move to you for Timmy?
It might be the best he's going to get.
The best part of this story is that the Beefs, and I love to say that, current quarterback James McNair has led the team to a 5-1 start and has thrown for 21 touchdowns so far. And in the ESPN story that this came from, he says, quote, "I think Tim can learn a lot from me," which should, by itself, end Tim Tebow's football career. It's over. Sorry, Tim.
And that'll end our season here on Listen Up. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next year. For the road? No!